because we all make those mistakes. The thing is, how do we help you to think about it so that next time you don't make the same mistake the same way, because then that means that our conduct process is failing our students in some way. Slide. On most campuses, a large number of our students aren't going to be going through our process. On my campus, for example, roughly 22% of our students have gone through the conduct process. It would be beneficial to know that number on your campus so that you can help the population of students who oftentimes are struggling in various ways. The first step to helping students going through the conduct process is to understand your student handbook or code of conduct. All expectations of your various institutions are typically spelled out there, and it's a good starting point for us to give students language to start a discussion whenever we're talking about behavior in their decision-making process. Slide. So there are a number of types of hearings that could take place on your campus. These may vary from campus to campus, and so bear with me here, but I am trying to capture everything that we typically see. And so there are honor code hearings, which are usually all around those academic cases. Then you have administrative hearings, and those administrative hearings may be housed in your Office of Residence Life or various offices that have administrators that work day in and day out with students. Typically, those administrative hearings are built for those cases where someone has already said that they're responsible, or we have pretty concrete information so that they can be done at a level where if there's an appeal, it can go to your assistant director, your director, but those cases are usually a lower level case. Then there are board or panel hearings, and those are for our more egregious incidents. We all have those violations on campus, fights and things of that nature, where we know that we just aren't going to tolerate it in our community, and students may be removed. Whenever removal is on the table, you don't typically have one person considering that, and you have a board or a panel of some type. It changes based on campuses. Some campuses have all student panels, some campuses have administrative or faculty panels, some have it where it's administrators, faculty, and students who are making those decisions. But those board panels are the ones that will usually make a decision that's going to make students most nervous about our conduct process. Slide. Some other types of hearings are those organizational hearings. Organizational hearings can vary depending on your campus. So at Gettysburg, for example, we have a very large Greek population considering the size of our campus. Our IFC, which is the Interfraternity Council, they have their own board that can deal with organizational issues, but at the same time, if students and organizations have an offense where we need to take a deeper look at it and they shouldn't be governing themselves, they may go to the Student Conduct Review Board. And so it just depends on your setup of if you will always have set organizational hearings or if you'll have organizational hearings that go through the same process as any other student. You will also have sexual misconduct and relationship violence hearings. Most campuses, especially with everything happening in our country with Title IX and the attention to sexual assaults and relationship violence, have a separate process that's reserved for these types of cases where those people are trained specifically for these types of cases, and they have set knowledge on things like trauma-informed training, on the investigation process, and they are versed in helping these students get through this process. If you don't have a separate process, it's important that you're sure that your board or whoever is hearing these cases gets that type of intense training so that they are qualified to handle these types of cases. The next type of case, and most campuses have an appeal process, but some don't. But another type of hearing is the appeal hearing process. That can vary from campus to campus, truly. Some campuses have boards to handle appeals. Others are just working with maybe their dean of students. Others with the director of a certain office. It could vary, but the appeal process is just really determined if the original finding will stand or be amended in some way. Slide. Back one. Depending on your campus, you may have a couple of other types of hearings or resolution processes. Mediation is one. We typically see this with things such as roommate conflicts or lower level disruptions to the community. You would never see this in some of those serious offenses such as sexual assaults. But these are good things to get students to work through when you're talking about things like roommate or floor disagreements, where you could get students on the same page. Likewise, if you have people on your campus who are certified in restorative justice circles or conferences, this is a very helpful process whenever harm has been done to your community. Here we use those for bias incidents where people can really get a chance to see how their behavior has impacted the entire community. But restorative justice circles are a great way to just get students thinking about and engaged in the learning process when they have a behavioral issue that you're trying to address on campus. Slide. It's important for us to recognize that this is not the court of law. Oftentimes, students will use language, and so it's really important that we're helping them understand that we are not the criminal system, and we try our hardest not to mirror the criminal system, even though there may be some things that align. So the things that we focus on in our process to ensure that students have the absolute best experience in it, even though it's a difficult time, is being sure that we have prompt, effective, and equitable investigations, that our learning objectives are kept at the core of the process so that it is an educational process, that we're providing fundamental due rights to the respondent, that we're providing an equitable process for the complainant, that we're providing involved parties with their rights, so that might be witnesses or others who are involved, being sure that they have rights in that process as well, and that we're following the federal guidance. We get a lot of things constantly telling us what we should be doing, what is best practice, and it is important to stay up on those things, reading the Chronicle, reading Inside Higher Ed, paying attention to what's happening in society on other campuses so that you can be sure that you're doing what's appropriate for your campus and fits your students' unique needs. So these are the things that we're striving for, unlike the court of law. Slide. Some comparisons in language that we often hear that we want to just show why we say we shouldn't compare ourselves to the court of law, and it's a very different process, is that in the criminal process, we're really talking about loss of liberty or life. We're talking about people being in prison, and everything that they have or have worked for could change and could be gone. With our process, we're talking about removal from a community. It's very different than losing their freedom. Federal rules of evidence is something that we're talking about in the criminal process, whereas in our process, we're really talking about the information that we're using, statements that are going to be included. One of the big things, and this comes up on most college campuses, is that in the criminal process, you're typically talking about guilt beyond reasonable doubt, or various burdens of proof that are higher than what we use on college campuses. We are talking about responsibility established on preponderance of evidence, which is the more likely than not standard. Ever since 2011, around 2012, we started to see more campuses shift to the preponderance of evidence standard, and this was important so that we could be sure that we were not treating things as the court of law and giving students a fair chance to explain their situation and their circumstances and make a decision based on more likely than not what occurred. That is the civil standard, and there is a reason that we are encouraged to use that, even though some campuses may not, and it depends on what works best for your campus. You'll often hear students using language like, oh, I got in trouble for committing a crime or breaking the law, the college doesn't have enough evidence on me, or I have to go and sit at this trial in front of a judge. None of these things apply to our process. We're really talking about violation of policy. We're talking about gathering information, not evidence. Now, you may have some cases that are happening, and this happens frequently, even if you aren't aware of it, where a student is going through a criminal process at the same time that they're going through the conduct process. And so it is important to recognize what we see as information, the police see as evidence. And so being sure that you have a memorandum of understanding with your local police department and district attorney's office to understand how you are going to conduct your investigations to be sure that you're not hurting theirs and that they can collect the evidence that they need before you start getting the information that you need. We're having hearings. We have board panels and things of that nature, not judge and jury. And we are ultimately looking at if a student is responsible or not responsible. We're trying to determine responsibility to hold them accountable. We're not talking about if they're guilty or not guilty. And so that's important language to catch, even if it doesn't seem like it. It's important to distinguish that so that students remember that the educational process is at the core of what we're doing. And lastly, we're talking about complainants and respondents. The complainant is the person who filed the complaint, and sometimes that may be your institution, and the respondent is the student or students accused of something. And it's important that they recognize that until they've been found responsible for something, they truly do need to go through the process understanding we're just trying to determine responsibility. We should not be treating them as if they're responsible before a case has been heard. Slide. So some challenges for students is that a lot of times the question that they're asking themselves is, what is the long-term effect going to be if they're found responsible for violating the code of conduct? They're thinking about some things that we don't necessarily think about when we're helping them or when they're coming to us. And they may not always articulate that they are wondering about what the long-term effect is going to be. But you best believe that that's what they're thinking about. And so students who do feel like they're responsible or concerned about parent involvement, like how involved will their parents be? Are you going to involve their parents? Are they going to involve their parents? This may be family, this may be a guardian, but is that parent going to be upset with the school? Are they going to be upset with them? How do they navigate that? Their ability to study abroad or off campus could be impacted. We don't necessarily think about some of the financial aid packages that our students have, and how will it be impacted if they're removed from the community for a period of time, or if they're in a situation like this one. Housing. Here, we don't allow students to live off campus if they have a certain number of points, for example. And so how might their housing be impacted? We also may move students depending on what's happening in their circumstances, and so then they are uprooted from their entire friend group. Awards, recognitions, extracurricular activity. Even when students know that they're going into a situation and they're not responsible for something, they are still concerned about their record. How will the accusation and charge itself hurt them down the line with their record? That's something that they're thinking about, even if institutionally it won't impact them. So those are things to consider. Slide. Some other things to keep in mind is that while the student handbook has all the information the student may need in it, they can be overwhelmed by the process and may not take the time to see that. So when you're helping them, keep directing them back to that. You need to be versed with your code of conduct as well so that you can help them navigate that, because it is a step-by-step guide for them. The other thing is students won't always be on campus while they're addressing charges. Most institutions have interim measures, so know what yours are, because sometimes they may be on an emergency or interim separation or suspension. Some students may have alterations to their class or work schedules. Some students are facing peer pressure. Organizations may be telling them, we really need you to take the fall for this one. Here, again, we have a point system, and so we've seen their group of friends have 8 points. At 10 points here, you go home. So if they don't have any points or they have 2 points, they may be getting pressure from their friend to take the 4 points for alcohol so that someone else doesn't have to face going home. So you have to understand the ins and outs so that you can help your students navigate that and reach the right place in their individual hearings. Slide. So this is very serious, and we need to make sure that we're taking it as seriously as students are. If you're tasked with helping a student and supporting them, it's important to recognize that the student's actions and or choices is what led to a violation and the sanctions, not our decision. However, we are the ones making a decision that could change the trajectory of their lives. Them leaving the campus and them having to go to another institution, or them taking a break and then coming back and not being with their class and things like that anymore could seriously impact them. So how do you help them reconcile this? That's one of the leading questions that we're going to address. Slide. I want to leave you with this before passing it to Hannah. Think about eggs, carrots, and coffee, and how do you get your students to think about this? So if you haven't heard this story, it's really a story about perspective and adversity and how you view things that are happening in your life. And so to make a long story short, a grandmother taught her granddaughter a lesson on adversity by boiling water in 3 separate pots and dropping an egg in one, a carrot in another, and a coffee bean in another. Her mother explained that, or her grandmother explained that each object had faced the same adversity, which was the boiling water, but each reacted differently. The carrot went in strong, hard, and unrelenting. However, after being subjected to boiling water, it softened and became weak. The egg had been fragile. It had this thin outer shell that was really protecting its liquid interior, but after it went through the boiling water, it became hardened. And the ground coffee beans were unique because they went in, and instead of them being changed by the water, they changed the water. And so how will you help your students change their surroundings? So I'm going to give it over to Hannah so that she can talk to you about how you do that.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. So as Jennifer just discussed, the general conduct process and how our students can be challenged through that process. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the opportunities we have as mid-level practitioners to impact students navigating the conduct system. Slide. Theory in the conduct system, or the conduct process. So many of us have been out of grad school for quite a while, so we might need to brush some cobwebs out of our minds. But as I began to think about this topic, I was drawn to the question of why. Why do we do this work? Tinto and Aston's theories directly connect to the work that we do with our students in the student conduct process. Vincent Tinto's theory of institutional departure, a model of institutional action, have three core concepts, which is support, feedback, and involvement. This is exactly what we should be doing in the conduct conversations and larger conduct process as we work with students. Alexander Aston's theory, which hopefully we all know Alexander Aston's theory of student involvement, a quote out of his theory is, "The greater the student's involvement in college, the greater will be the amount of student learning and personal development." This is another way for a student to be involved in our conduct process. And I would say this is a slightly more radical way of thinking about student involvement and not a way that we've been challenged to think about. But can this be an entry point for students in being involved in their own educational learning? Slide. Theory to practice. So I would suggest students get into trouble and would probably prefer that the entire situation would just disappear. I think sometimes students wish we had a magic wand that we could wave, that it would just all go away. And I would suggest that most students do not identify going through the conduct process as a positive step in their college or university experience. Based on Aston and Tinto's theories, a student's experience and involvement in an institution's conduct system can be an entry point for them to be more engaged. When we think of Aston and Tinto's theories and how students are typically involved, the conduct system is not at the forefront of examples. What if we went into every conduct conversation thinking that the conversation could be an entry point for this specific student to be connected to the institution? How, as mid-level practitioners, do we provide the opportunity for students to reflect, learn, and be involved in the institution differently based on their experience in the conduct system? And with that, how do we create space? How do we listen? And how do we ask questions of students rather than lecturing to them about what they've done wrong or their mistakes? Slide. So now we're going to watch a video, which is hopefully very unrealistic, and then we're going to talk about it a little.
Hi, I'm Sally, and I will be your conduct officer. I rush you to report that you may have been involved in an incident. It involves you drinking last Tuesday.
I do not drink. I was not drinking. What proof do you have?
The resident advisor documented that you were in a room with 14 empty beer cans and a handle of whiskey. There was also a beer funnel.
They are mistaken.
You handed them your ID. You also said that you were George, drunk, and did not care if they knew it. You also posted pictures on Facebook.
I was in the room, but I was not drinking.
The report indicates that you smelled of alcohol, had slurred speech, and were screaming, "I'm so drunk, so drunk."
They were rude to me. The resident advisor is out to get me. I did not turn my roommate agreement in on time. I also have a cold. It was the cold medicine. Is it illegal for me to treat my cold?
Can you explain the part about you screaming you were smashed?
They misheard. I was talking about Super Smash Brothers.
The report says that you specifically said, "I'm smashed. That is the last time I drank a six-pack of beer."
I was talking to my mother on the phone. I told her I will be home at 6, have no fear.
Why did it smell of alcohol?
I sprayed Lysol. Besides, you cannot prove it.
You failed your breathalyzer.
I want to file a complaint. The officer was rude to me. He said I was drinking, which was...
So this is obviously an extreme version of a conduct conversation, but it shows some good examples of what not to do. So when we look at the general room setup, if we look at the desk, clearly the desk is between the student and the officer. And in some situations, this makes sense if you're concerned about a student might become violent or become physical. But in, I would say, most situations, creating a space that is open and inviting to the student to have the conversation it is helpful. So thinking about how is your office set up and how does it invite that conversation. Another item is the officer jumped right into the conduct conversations with no introductions. It's nice to build a rapport with your student and to help them feel at ease so that they can talk about their perspective, and that they feel like that they can trust you. And I sometimes like to do this by talking about other topics, talking about their classes, maybe an event that's happened on campus, maybe a break that's coming up or has just happened, but really engaging them in a slightly different way than just jumping right into the conduct, the matter at hand. The other piece is talk to them a little bit about what your role is. So introduce yourself. What is your position at the larger institution, but what is your position in the conduct system, and how will you work with them through the conduct system? Was the student given a space to tell their story? Clearly this conduct officer just jumped right in and with the information that they were given. And I like to change it up a bit when I have these conversations, and I think students expect that they're going to have to go in and defend what they've done. And so what I like to do is to say, I have a report, or I have this documentation, but I want to hear your perspective. Tell me your story. So I really provide them an opportunity to tell their story, and I try not to interrupt them. So really to give them the floor to be able to do this. And then throughout, I might ask a clarifying question if there's something that I'm confused about along the way. And then not until the end do we discuss why the information I have, and I share the information that I have, might be different than the information that they have. And then we talk about where those inconsistencies happen and what are the opportunities for them to learn, and if there's next steps that need to be made. The other piece is, was the student given an opportunity to be able to reflect? And it was very interesting in that it was the conduct officer just fired statements off to this student, and the student was clearly very defensive throughout that conversation. So how do we shift the conversation? And you know, this was an extreme case, but there are students that are going to come in and be very defensive with you, and helping them reflect on the situation is challenging. And I would suggest when that begins to happen, how do you pause the situation? Maybe that's with asking a question or asking them to restate something that they've said. But how do you help them provide an opportunity for them to be able to reflect on the situation versus just being defensive? Slide. Different institutions, but we have a commonality, which is students. I will make an assumption we're all doing the work that we do to support student learning and their overall success. We all come from different institutions with varying policies and procedures. Different institutions lend themselves better to building relationships with students, but no matter what system you are working in, you can be intentional about advising and mentoring students. So what does this look like? So like the conduct conversation we just saw, how does your initial conduct conversation look like with that student? How you inform the student about the conduct process. Sometimes the process can really feel like a you versus them, that we're out to get them somehow, or that they have to defend what they've done. I like to share as much information with students as possible. So if I refer a student or an incident to the conduct board, I let students know what I will present to the board, what questions I might ask of them or their witnesses, and what sanction recommendations I will make to the board. It's not about getting the student or out to get the student, but it's about how do you impact their learning. Slide. Your intentionality to connect effectively with a student provides connection to the institution, which Aston and Tinto would argue are essential to this student's success. Hearing stories allows us to see the student as part of a bigger picture and not just as a specific conduct concern you're addressing. Items that might come up by expanding the conversation are social identity, past trauma, financial struggles, challenges outside of college, health concerns, which could include mental health. We might hear stories or issues you never expected. It's important to honor those stories and connect students to necessary resources. And students must still be held accountable and understanding and learning how their conduct impacted others. And being able to balance those two pieces is a difficult thing to do, but it's something that is important that we learn how to do. Connecting with the student after the conduct issue has been closed is an important and often forgotten step. What happens when you see the student on campus? Remember, you are the one in positional power. While it might feel awkward to both you and the student, that bridge you extend might be what the student needs later down the road to reach out and ask for help when they need it. Slide. Accountability. It's important for to balance support with accountability. We need to provide support as needed, but not enabling students. But support will look differently to each student, which is why it is important to know the student beyond the conduct issue, to hear their story. Having an understanding for a student's story and experiences will help develop sanctions that have the greatest impact on student learning. Sanctions should help students reflect, learn, and make different decisions in the future. Recognizing that the conduct process differs from institution to institution, the student conduct process should be about student learning, not punitive. Sanctions should reflect this philosophy. The conduct process and follow-up sanctions should assist a student in their understanding of how their behaviors impact others. If we do not help students understand how their behaviors and decisions impact others, we are doing them a disservice when they leave our institution. Slide. Most students come into my office like they're being called into the principal's office. I like to surprise them and to create a very different experience. In fact, many students will say, this is not at all what I expected to happen in this conversation. When students feel like you have their best interest in mind, they are more willing to open up and share with you. We all have those students that want to get in and out of your offices as quickly as possible. How do we slow those students down and engage them in a conversation? And again, I would say that's through a process of asking questions and truly listening to them. We need to check ourselves in that every time a student walks into our office, we provide them an opportunity to share their story and respond appropriately. Many of us have positions that we're going 100 miles per hour, jumping from meeting to meeting with different topics. When we are with a student, we need to be in the right headspace, or we do a disservice to our student. So we need to not be thinking about the meeting that we just had or the meeting that we're going to, but we need to be able to sit with that student and be engaged with them in that moment. Slide. Parents, families, and guardians. In today's day and age, you will have interactions with parents as their students navigate the conduct system. Sometimes there are, and in some systems, there are opportunities to engage families and parents in the process. Sometimes this is helpful, and sometimes this can complicate matters. One of the things that we are addressing right now on our campus is when we have students that have a history of abuse in their families, and thinking about, does it make sense to involve a parent or a family or a guardian, or does that create more trauma, or does that re-traumatize, or does that bring up, is not helpful in helping the student learn and reflect. So something, what we're specifically looking at is how are we being trauma aware with a parental involvement and practice in doing that. Then there's the other side of parent involvement, is where parents decide to insert themselves in the conduct system. So when you get a phone call from a parent saying that their student is going through the process. And the first thing, and Jennifer touched on this, is making sure that parents understand the difference between the conduct system and the criminal justice system, and that there is a significant difference towards that. So it's educating the parents, family members, and guardians. Also, deciding how much information to share with them. Chances are they've heard a perspective from their student, and so how do you make sure that they have the correct information but without violating confidentiality? Helping the parent or guardian understand their role in the process. So how do they help their student? How can they be involved in the process is important. And the other piece is how to help them access other resources and offices on campus. So is it for themselves, or maybe there's some opportunities for them to encourage their student to get connected? Maybe that's counseling service or health services or an academic advisor, or if they are going through the criminal justice system, are there legal services on campus? Slide. Takeaways. You should see every interaction with a student in the conduct system as an opportunity. Provide students space to tell their story, being aware of how social identities might impact the space. And this is your social identity, the student's social identity, and the social identities of others involved in the situation. Assist a student in reflecting and learning about their decisions and conduct. Hold students accountable to their conduct through sanctions that will continue to provide opportunities for them to reflect. When it makes sense, follow up with students after your conversations, maybe to connect on something you discussed in the conversations aside from the conduct matter, to provide resources, to just continue the relationship, or to build a bridge after a particularly challenging conduct conversation. So now I'm going to pass it off to Kate, who's going to talk a little bit about working with colleagues.
Thank you, Hannah. So Jennifer discussed the general conduct process and how our students can be challenged through it. Hannah covered working with students navigating the process. And now I'm going to discuss working with and supporting our colleagues in the student conduct process. So one thing to note, not only do we all work in different institutions, but we also have different teaching and presentation styles, which will be evident in a few slides for me. Slide, please. So working with and supporting our colleagues during the student conduct process is a vital role that we have, and there are two facets of this. Supporting our colleagues directly involved in the adjudication process, such as discipline review hearing officers who could go by different names at your institutions, and supporting those not directly involved, such as reporting faculty, staff, students, advisors, or parents, guardians, and families. Slide, please. An essential reminder for our colleagues is that of the basic rights and responsibilities that students have on campus. It can often be difficult to break the mold and mentality that students have no rights but to obey, especially at an institution with a great deal of enduring faculty and staff culture that has not historically valued student rights. We have the opportunity and responsibility to educate our colleagues about students' rights, particularly around confidentiality, the right to due process, and the right to representation. So who are our colleagues and what are some of the intricacies in working with them? Slide, please. So we include parents and guardians in the scope of describing our colleagues as they are essential impacts in students' lives, whether positive or negative. Next to students who fail to take responsibility for their actions, one of the most challenging and for me frustrating aspects of the conduct process is parent and guardian communications, calls, emails, and even office visits. Whether directly or indirectly involved in conduct, if we had $1 for every time an angry parent or guardian called to complain about the process or find out more information about their student's case, we would each be rich. Parents and guardians generally do not take too well to being told we cannot violate a student's right to confidentiality even if they are paying, and review the incident or their student-specific adjudication process with them. In these communications, it's imperative that we do not violate FERPA and divulge information to parents or guardians, no matter how many tears are spilled. You know, when two students are having a roommate conflict and Billy's parents call and simply don't understand why Bob just can't be moved, we need to help them understand that all students have rights, not just their own. Our focus is to, without revealing case-pertinent information, explain the conduct process at our respective institutions and what the student's rights and responsibilities within that process are, as well as options a student has for support on campus. Slide, please. We also include faculty and staff in our scope. When in the role of reporting parties, often faculty or staff will want an immediate resolution to an issue that they perceive to be a hindrance to their ability to teach or perform their job, such as Billy's acted up twice now in my class and I want him removed immediately. And it can be a challenge for these faculty and staff to understand that unless the student is an immediate threat to the health and safety of the community, they will not be immediately removed and will be granted the rights of due process and an out-of-classroom educational experience. Part of our job as educators is to help our colleagues understand this. And speaking of out-of-classroom learning, slide please. One prevailing thought process in higher ed academia is the belief that learning occurs exclusively in academic classrooms and related sites, such as labs, field settings, or in my case, ships, and only under the direction or supervision of faculty members. When student learning is regarded as achieving the appropriate levels of content mastery and academic learning becomes the principal focus of college students, it's seen as the only reason that students are at a university and that academics need to encompass 110% of their lives. This thought process believes that out-of-classroom hours are supposed to be used only for studying and homework, not for other activities which encourage holistic student growth. I'd like to think that as an industry we're further along in this process than we actually are. I was named 2 years ago to a leadership development task force on campus, and a number of faculty were on the force as well. And of course, we discussed the importance of academic learning and how leadership development occurs in the classroom, but when those of us in student affairs switch gears to focus on leadership development outside of the classroom, a faculty member literally said out loud, "Listen, kids only need to know reading, writing, and arithmetic. They don't need to know any of that other fluffy stuff, and it's not our job to teach them, and no one here does that." Slide, please. So I responded and said, actually, that's part of my job. And after the meeting, I went up to the faculty member and said, I'd love to take you to lunch and chat about the meeting. Do you have time tomorrow? The faculty member responded yes, and the following day, they began our lunch with, so I don't understand your job. Can you tell me more? By the end of our lunch, that same faculty member said, well, if that's what you and your team do, then it needs to be mandatory and students need to be going to all of your programs. It was such a powerful moment to have this faculty member literally go from one end of the spectrum to the other within the span of a lunch meeting, and shows the power of the opportunity of educating. Often our colleagues do not know the extent of what we do in our jobs. They may not understand the importance of co-curricular learning and how that shapes a student's life and learning process, which impacts their classroom learning as well. Everyone learns differently, and students don't necessarily learn problem-solving skills, how to mediate conflicts, how to register for classes, how to seek out emotional support when in distress, or even how to live with another person when they're in the classroom. These are vital skills for students to succeed not just in the classroom but in life. And we often need to remind our colleagues that we're not just training students to provide output at a job, but to successfully navigate life and provide meaningful contributions to society. We, in turn, get the opportunity to educate educators about what students' out-of-classroom opportunities provide them with. And one of those out-of-classroom opportunities is the conduct process. Slide, please. So supporting our colleagues during the student conduct process can take several forms. Colleagues can have different roles. They can be advocates, support systems, witnesses, advisors for students. They can be hearing officers, or they can be on the receiving end of poor student conduct. Our first steps are to make sure that, one, our colleagues know how to report conduct concerns. You'd be really surprised how many colleagues don't know how to bring up when they are concerned about a student's conduct in the classroom or elsewhere. And two, that our colleagues understand our university's conduct systems from the initial report to the appeal of the outcome and their involvement or opportunities in the process. Another great educational and support opportunity comes in the form of behavioral intervention teams, or BITs. At one of my past institutions, the BIT was just student affairs staff. Here, we have faculty who regularly request BIT meetings to discuss their concerns about a student, and the academic dean is a member of the team. We're fortunate that Cal Maritime recognizes the importance of having everyone around the table. We offer the reporting faculty to attend the BIT meeting to give us more information rather than only utilize the report that they filled out. As only those directly involved with the incident or student are invited, the educational need to know allows us the ability to share limited information about the student with our colleagues without violating FERPA. This can be particularly useful when a faculty member simply believes a student is acting out in only his or her class, and we come to discover that they're acting out in the residence hall. For us, they aren't attending formation, they haven't shown up to their on-campus job, or elsewhere on campus. This ability to have multiple, what we refer to as pingers, so this ability to have multiple pingers enables the university to collaborate on our forms of support for our students and gives our colleagues the opportunity to understand out-of-classroom impact and request support from us as well. It gets all departments involved in providing a holistic support system to our students and helps faculty understand that out-of-classroom experiences impact students' academic performances and engagement in the classroom. Slide, please. So a key issue that frustrates students is to have a university policy that you don't follow. Supporting institutional policy and helping our colleagues do so is vital. Prior to my arrival here, the conduct process was notorious for being an extremely biased process. Students literally received more demerits for having the wrong color socks with their uniforms than for alcohol violations, or weren't even held accountable for alcohol violations if they were a certain staff member or faculty member favorite. After I did some research and let our new president know, the university changed the administration of the conduct process to the Department of Student Affairs, and we began a thorough review and edit of our conduct process and policies that are still being tweaked to this day. In just 1 year of finally having consistency, I noticed a significant change in the student body. Most were extremely cranky with the fact that the process was no longer based on who you knew, but it was consistent. And although cranky for a short while, this quickly morphed into appreciation for the fact that it was no longer based on who you knew, but students were treated equally, given due process, and held appropriately accountable. And while we have many different facets, the consistency of our conduct review boards and discipline review hearings has created a more fair and accountable conduct process across the board. It is imperative that we support our institutional policies by following and being consistent with them. Annually reviewing your student handbook with your colleagues is a terrific, although time-consuming idea. By reviewing, you're kept abreast of your conduct expectations and your process, and you can also discover inconsistencies and opportunities for policy change by reviewing and openly discussing them. We even include what we refer to as our triad. It's our Associated Student President, our Corps of Cadets Commander, and our Student Hall Director, all student positions, in this yearly review for their input from a student perspective. As I mentioned early in my slides, it can be difficult to break the mold that students have no right but to obey at an institution with enduring faculty and staff culture. And it can be challenging as well when changes are made and colleagues who don't agree with the changes not only fail to support them, but openly fight them. For example, our students and some of our faculty are uniformed, and this summer our president wanted to stiffen up the uniform requirements for the faculty, because how can we expect our students to wear the uniform correctly if our faculty don't? There are faculty who openly and vehemently don't follow and fight this requirement, which in turn teaches our students to do the same. I had a past employee who constantly parked in 30-minute parking spots for the entire workday, and I consistently reprimanded and documented them for this. We cannot expect our students to follow policy if we ourselves do not. This opportunity to be a role model for our students cannot be taken lightly. Supporting your colleagues when advocating for students can be a tough line to straddle for some. If our colleagues don't understand or support student rights and due process, our explanation, advocacy, and support of students' rights can alienate faculty or staff and potentially damage relationships that have been formed. We administrators need to ensure that we provide resources for our colleagues and are willing to have difficult conversations to facilitate support for our students and the process. Slide, please. So the takeaways for this section: every student has the right to due process and confidentiality, no matter what a parent or professor may say. Learning occurs outside of the classroom too. It's good practice to know your university's conduct system from initial report to appeal of outcome, what that looks like from the student perspective and what that looks like from the conduct administrator perspective. Ask yourself, do you have the right people around the table? Who else can be included in offering support for students, staff, faculty, advisors, family, etc.? And number 5, follow your university's policies and procedures. Slide, please. So to wrap up our webinar, we want you to remember the following. In general, the student conduct process seeks to establish and maintain an environment that provides for the development of the young adult as a whole person. 2, this is not the court of law. Our student conduct processes are in place to be an educational experience for students, not solely a punitive experience. 3, we want to provide a brave space for students to share their story, for them to understand that we have their best interest in mind and are here to help them develop as a person. Developing includes icky parts in life, and we are here to support our students through that. 4, sometimes we can go through the motions of conduct conversations without really being present and invested. We practitioners need to recognize that this student may not have been connected to the institution in any other way until now, and we need to think about how we can turn a negative experience into a positive opportunity for learning. 5, learning occurs outside of the classroom. Our careers are geared to helping each and every student become more than just a machine regurgitating information. We are here to help them grow to be valuable members of society. And last but not least, every conduct conversation is an opportunity to impact learning. Whether that be student learning or staff, faculty, parent, guardian learning, we have the responsibility and privilege of facilitating learning and growth in so many different ways, and that is truly a powerful and impactful position to be in, one for which the 3 of us are daily grateful. Slide, please. And hopefully I spoke fast enough that we are now ready for questions.
Yes, thank you very much for that informal presentation. Currently we have a question from Laura asking, do you have any input on coach notification?
Hey Laura, this is Jennifer. We do coach notification here, and our coaches have asked, because we're on a point system, I'm not sure what type of system you have, but because we're on a point system, typically we don't do notifications until students have had a second violation, but coaches have always asked that they know up front. our Director of Student Rights and Responsibilities meets with the athletic director weekly to give a full conduct report on all athletes, but then also we have communication directly with the coaches to let them know what's happening with their athletes. And what we found is that typically their athletes have already talked to them, and our system is lagging a bit because it's done weekly. But coach notification is imperative, and we actually have to go through the process because here's the important part. Once the coaches are notified, there has to be consistency in how they're addressing their teams. And so we have to all sit down and get the coaches on a rubric system so that certain things the coaches can handle on their own, other things the athletic director had to get involved in so that we would have that consistency. After 1 year having an athlete from 2 different teams, on one team kicked off and on another suspended for 2 games. So just be sure that your coaches are responding appropriately when you do notify them.
May I as well, Nikki?
Yep.
Hi, Laura. So my previous institution, I did the initial coach notification, and there was very open and clear communication. Here we actually do not notify coaches at all, and I've noticed a significant difference in the way incidents are handled with the team. So I echo Jennifer that it's really important to have open communication and have that dialogue with your administrators to see what that looks like at your institution.
Thank you. We have another comment asking for input of how do we address students with mental health issues and talk to them about getting services, including counseling, when they feel they don't need to.
This is Hannah. I can speak to this a little bit. So here at Smith, that was something that we were coming up to again and again, and this particularly became difficult where their behaviors were impacting the community that they were living in or working in or studying in. And so while they might not have been at a place of being able to identify that needed help, that there needed to be some type of intervention, but we didn't feel like it would be effective to send them through the traditional conduct system. Some evaluation committee, so we're aware that there is something bigger going on, and what that committee does, and it typically, it always involves either our dean of students or associate dean of students. Depending on the situation, it would involve health services or counseling services or disability services. Typically, it's going to involve their class dean and then a member of the residence life professional staff who work closely with them. And so the student is aware that there will be an intervention committee that meets, and the student is invited to come to that. And it's really a conversation about here are the behaviors that are impacting your community and that need to change, and we're here to support you and to figure out how to do that. And through that process, typically there are some expectations around counseling or seeking out some other resources. So that's a way at Smith that we've kind of address that concern around a student who there's clearly some behaviors, but it's stemming from, or not necessarily stemming from, but their mental health or other health concerns are impacting those behaviors.
Another question has been posed from Kia. How do you manage faculty expectations when the results of the hearing is not satisfactory to them?
This is Kate. That is extremely challenging, and I don't think there's a perfect answer for that other than it is really important to, as I mentioned, even though relationships can be damaged through something like that, it's important to keep having conversations. You may never tell a faculty member why or what or anything, but all you can do is keep having those conversations, keep that line of communication open, keep it positive, and remind them that you can't talk about specifics of a case, and they won't like that, but keep chatting.
And I echo Kate. This is Jennifer. And recently this year, we've really started pulling faculty in the room because we've had a hard time managing their expectations before, and so now when we have concluded with a hearing or have an outcome, we pull faculty in and we update them throughout the process now, and then pull them in and say, this is how we got here. And like Kate said, without divulging too much information, we're still able to say this is how we got here. And our hope is that you can help us to continue to make this a learning moment for the student or organizations, because typically our faculty are more worked up about the organizational stuff.
Wonderful. Another question has been posed through Twitter. How do we recommend for professional development for conduct professionals? Or what would you recommend? Excuse me.
So I would say webinars are helpful, just to keep the mind going and thinking about things that other institutions are doing and what you could pull into your practice, but also sending people to conferences where you can afford to do that, getting involved with your local chapters of ACPA, for example, or other local consortiums. If you have other institutions close to you and you don't have a consortium, considering pulling them together to get your conduct officers actively and constantly engaged in thinking about how to best manage student conduct. And I would say that that should go for people who could even help in conduct, even if they aren't right now.
And this is Hannah, and honestly, for me, you know, I've always been involved in conduct. My position purely isn't conduct, but like getting involved in ACPA's Commission for Student Conduct and Legal Issues is a perfect example of this is an area of interest, this is something I need to continue to learn about, and so surrounding myself with a group of people that are also interested in that and engaging in conversations through that group of people.
This is Kate. Another opportunity you have at Cal Maritime, we use Maxient, and Maxient has a yearly conference. And so depending on what your conduct software is, if you attend that conference, you're connecting yourself with other conduct practitioners across the country. And that's also a great opportunity for networking. What's best practice at your institution? What do you do? What do you do? And a great way to get ideas that you bring back to campus and can really start some dialogue on your own campus with.
And Kate makes a great point, because a lot of your conduct software systems will have conferences that typically you're sending your IT people to. It is really good to send the people who are your super users of your conduct system and your hearing officers to those conferences.
All right, it is actually that time to wrap up this webinar. At this time, I would like to thank Jennifer, Hannah, and Kate for your insight and words of wisdom, and thank you, viewers, for attending today's webinar. Let's continue the conversation on MLCOP's Facebook group or on Twitter at #ACPA Midlevel. MLCOP's next webinar will be the second part to the MLCOP FSAO series with Dr. Laura Bayless on Tuesday, January 12, 2016, at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time or 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please be on the lookout for registration information soon. Additionally, MLCOP hopes many of you will be joining us at the ACPA Annual Convention in Montreal. Our open meeting will be on Tuesday, March 8th from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m., room to be announced. And MLCOP hopes to host a mid-level panel on Monday, March 7th at the convention. We will keep you posted via the listserv, Facebook, and Twitter. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the MLCOP chair, Dave, or myself, the chair-elect, at malcop.acpa@gmail.com. I also have received a last-minute question regarding the PowerPoint presentation. Currently, right now, at the panel, the webinar panel, there should be a box that indicates handout. Please look there and you can download the presentation. If not, within the next month, this webinar will be transcribed and posted to YouTube and will be shared via social media once the transcription has been completed. Once again, thank you all for your time and participation today. And MLCOP wishes you an all safe and happy winter holidays, and we look forward to seeing you next year. This webinar will now close.